Arrow. Spring passed by slowly as Clovis recovered, but by the summer his strength was near fully regained, and Lucas, who could not have told, had such a strong build before, much like Clovis' natural build, stood strong and tall. They had spent some time planting crops and praying for rains, though much of that work had been for the other former slaves to do, many of whom chose to stay with Clovis and his father rather than make their own way in the world. Although the Duke were in exile, Clovis supposed it was better for these slaves to be a part of his new lands than to turn around and attempt to find a master somewhere else. Besides, they were probably quite tired of masters, and the Duke was a fair man, an honorable man. Anyway, they liked it better here, and planting the crops for the first time in the soil of this part of Hild, it was relaxing to Clovis. Things seemed normal, though of course they weren't, but it gave him some time to relax, though he never fully did. Clovis never really could, not fully. "When shall we go?" Lucas looked to Clovis. The man had dark hair, nearly black, and now a beard shorter than before. His nose was pointed and his eyes were small, but he was a good-looking man and an honorable man. Clovis was happy to have met him, and happier still to call him friend. "We shall go when it is time," said Clovis, ever patient, despite his rage. "When will it be time?" Lucas jested. "Oh, you know," said Clovis, "when the old man decides. Cannot leave before." Lucas nodded, understanding. He surveyed the fields in front of which they were standing. I must like it here." "As do I," said Clovis, taking a deep breath, "but we must do what we must do." Lucas nodded. It was not out of necessity now that they fought, but for the sake of honor, privilege, and glory. Clovis wondered how much glory there would be for an assassin. He wondered how many men he would have to kill. Right now it did not matter, he supposed. He needed men. He needed to be taken seriously by the king, and at the moment he had 20. Plus however many ex-slaves were interested in joining him. At a guess he thought that he would need at the least 1,000 battle-ready men. Clovis did not really know what his plan was, but he knew that the king had his enemies, and that if on the way to the capital of Lucretia he decided to talk with these enemies, and perhaps he would have his chance at regaining his father's position of duke. But Clovis now wanted more than that. His hardships had seen to that. Lucas again interrupted Clovis' thought. "Has Wyatt spoken to you yet?" "Of what?" Clovis turned to face him, a look of questioning on his face as his brows furrowed. Wyatt was the servant girl whom his father had discovered for Clovis. Not long after having met, after Clovis had regained his strength and his form, they had slept together. Now she was pregnant with his child, though Clovis could not admit to his father or to the people over whom his father ruled, which was a small mass of a dozen or so families, that it was his. That would bring dishonor to his family, and the people would not be happy. He supposed that God was not happy with him either, but he loved the woman, and somehow he would take care of their son, should he live the coming conquest. If he were going to slay the king, as it were, Clovis knew that he would need the army he intended to amass throughout the kingdom or beyond. Otherwise the king would not take him seriously, and would not invite him into his palace, which was an old unimpressive castle as far as Clovis was concerned. The king may also think that Clovis' intentions would be to overthrow him, and so Clovis knew that he must be cautious when searching for this army's men. He would likely have to, he knew, leave the kingdom in search of the army, which would make the search ever more difficult, as there were men beyond Hild who spoke strange tongues with whom he would not be able to communicate, and men who had never heard he or his father's name. The difficulties were obvious, but he was determined. 1,000 men, said Clovis loudly to Lucas. Let's go. It was mere weeks before they left for the Otherland across the sea, of which much was not well known. Great maps were drawn for Hild, detailing every piece of the kingdom and its land. But the Otherland, well, that is why it had the name. Clovis prayed with his father the night before he left, and again slept with his pregnant non-wife, Waya. When he was done saying his goodbyes, he took the 20 fighting men that he had there in Hild and put them on a ship he'd hired for a bargain price. How he would move the men he would find in the Otherland across the western sea he did not know, but he supposed he would find out along the way, if fate had its way with him. Besides, he had learned a lot of the Otherland from his enslavement, like its true name, though he would not speak it, and he dreaded returning there as much as he dreaded the thought of his prior year. But that year had made Clovis ruthless. His father sensed it in him, urging him to take care with his thoughts in his new way lest it overrun him, but Clovis would not listen. He did not care how he accomplished his coming goals. He simply knew that he would, and that he must, no matter what it cost him. His men respected him, the few that there were, 21 in total. As they boarded the ship, poor as it was, they greeted him brightly, beaming at the opportunity to serve him, or at least the opportunity to become wealthy men. Still, many of the men knew what a long shot this venture was, and some thought that surely they would fail, but Clovis knew, though they would not speak their minds of the matter. He would not have allowed that anyways. Out of all of them, Clovis was probably the most experienced and skilled warrior, but he was a little out of practice, and so he wondered a little who might best him in a duel. He would never find out, but he had the thoughts, and he practiced little in the time between his freeing and the present, opting instead to be with Wyatt, plant crops, and spend the rest of the time with Lucas and his father. A mistake, partly, Clovis admitted to himself, and that day on the boat he began to practice with Lucas. He was still quite good, and so was Lucas, though admittedly he'd been in a few battles in his lifetime and survived. Clovis would credit him that. As they fought, the men gathered round, laughing and jeering as Clovis sidestepped and confused Lucas, effectively walking circles around him, but Lucas was defending well enough. It gave Clovis some confidence in his ability to save his life, should the time come for such a thing to occur, and it surely would. Several weeks passed, and their food supply was running dangerously low. Fortunately, the Otherland appeared, like out of a dream, a deep fog engulfing its surface, making it barely visible from the sea, but it was there. They would hunt, as the lands had plenty of game, Clovis assured his crew. They were here, and their journey truly began. The first man to set foot on the Otherland was Rickard, an older man in his early 40s. His brown beard had specks of gray scattered beneath his nose and mouth, but he had a sharp eye, and he scouted well for them. When he returned to tell them that the way, wherever the way was in fact clear for them. With this knowledge, Clovis gave the command to disembark, and many of the men could not wait to be on dry land once more, as many were not used to the sea, though some were. As Clovis stepped off of the boat, he smelled it immediately. It smelled like opium, a compound often used when sharpening blades, such as swords, daggers, and the like, but also sometimes used for kindling when starting a fire. It was not at all a highly flammable material, for if it were, then the sparks from a grinding stone would cause it to burst into flame, rendering the exercise of sharpening blades against such a device pointless. But once it did burn, it burned intensely hot and very bright. Clovis knew that someone had set a signal fire almost instinctively. Some of the more experienced men knew it as well and began to grumble about it, while the rest tried to figure out what the smell might be. Clovis informed them immediately. "It's a signal fire," Clovis said calmly. "They know we're here." "Who's they, Lord?" asked one of the men, a brawny man named Wes. Clovis only looked back on the boat, he said. "We sail along the coast until they arrive." The men, Clovis could tell, wanted to complain, but with the thought of imminent danger they quieted themselves. Some of them welcomed a fight, however, and would have rather stayed on dry land and to fight it, but Clovis did not fancy losing half, or worse, all of his men in one single fight the first day of their arrival. He was not that stupid, and perhaps the coming party did not wish to fight, but Clovis, after knowing these lands for a year, did not desire to risk the possibility that they did not want to fight. For if he fought, he would fight until he died rather than risk enslavement, and he would make sure that all of his men followed suit. When everyone was on the boat, Clovis gave the command to set sail, and they were off to somewhere safer for now. Clovis hoped to gain some intelligence from seeing the men who arrived, but he was not sure that the fog would clear in time. Fortunately, it did. When it did, and the boat was out far enough in the sea, Clovis took a small telescope from one of the men and eyed the enemy, if they were in fact that. They were a small group, only 6 men, or that's what Clovis counted. Probably slavers looking for small boats of unarmed men, women, and children to take, as sometimes refugees did arrive in the Otherland, sometimes from Hild and sometimes from the other distant lands. Clovis had seen as much, and seeing the slavers preying upon them in such a way enraged him. He gave the order to sail towards them. "When we arrive," he told his men, "we kill them all but one." Clovis knew that his men, with their greater numbers, would overtake the small party. Besides, he had a few good archers, and Clovis too was quite good at archery, as he had practiced from such a young age, the age of 5 or so. With he and what amounted to 4 other men, who could pull a bowstring, they wouldn't likely kill many of the slavers before even they set foot in the Otherland. Or they would likely kill many of the slavers before even they set foot in the Otherland, and the slavers would not expect them to be warriors, giving them an advantage, or so Clovis anticipated. As they approached the shoreline once more, this time in a new location, by their would-be captors, Clovis gave the order to fire to the 4 men who could aim a bow, their arms outstretched, pulling back tightly their bowstrings to shoot. As they did, Clovis could see that one of the slavers fell back and had taken an arrow to the chest, though he was still wriggling, clinging to his pathetic life. Clovis did not hesitate to order another barrage of arrows, But as he did, the 5 remaining slavers fired their own arrows. As they sailed into the boat and all around his men, he would have shouted to his men to duck, but he had hidden most of them below deck in the hull of the ship. He did not want the slavers to be scared off by their numbers, but it appeared now that they were beyond angry at him, and would probably stay despite the disadvantage, maybe. Clovis didn't risk it, leaving the men in the hull, and began ordering the archers to fire. 2 more of their men dropped, these 2 obviously dead, leaving 3. They fired, and one of Clovis' men, Wolfshine, was knocked back. Fortunately, the arrow had just grazed his arm, and he quickly and without command took aim and fired, killing yet another one of their men. He was truly the best shot of the bunch, Clovis could remember thinking to himself, and for every blow that was dealt him, he dealt equally or more so back. Clovis liked that about the man. With their 2 remaining men, they began to run. The first man to be shot still wriggling around in the grass, blood seeping out of him and covering the green that lay beneath him. Clovis smiled, but he was not satisfied. He took a bow from one of his men, knocked an arrow, and fired at one of the men running. It hit him in the back, and he fell down dead. It had been dead on the shot, and Clovis was proud of what he had done. As their ship approached the shore, they carefully anchored it, and when they were firmly on dry land, Clovis took a handful of his men, Wolfshine, Lucas, and Rickard among them. The man who had been shot first, who was still yet wriggling around, laughably enough to Clovis and his men, had been lucky. The arrow had not pierced any vital organs, but had gone between his lung and his heart, and stuck him to the ground. It was a large arrow, after all. Clovis had a bow and arrow in hand now. In fact, he took aim at the man's head. "I know what you are," said Clovis. The man did not respond, so Clovis fired an arrow next to his head. The man looked at him now, spat, and began to speak. He spoke in a language that none of the men, nor Clovis, could understand, for despite his time in the Otherland, he had never truly grasped the language that they spoke, and there were several of them. Which one this was, Clovis did not know, and he sighed. Somehow this man was going to have to lead him to a village, or town, or city, even if there were such a place in the Otherland. That was Clovis' goal, for perhaps in such places he could find men. How he would speak to them he was still working out, but he had very little choice, as they also now had little food. Praying that it would not kill the man, for he did need him, or felt that he did, Clovis pulled the arrow from his wound, and the man curled over, grasping it and yelling. "Get him up," Clovis told Rickard. "Dress his wounds, if you would." "Lord," Rickard replied in affirmation. "My lord," Lucas said, "will the man who escaped not send for more men?" Clovis shook his head. "I think not. These were slavers looking for men, and so they likely have no more men." "And if they do," asked Lucas, "then we kill them." Clovis smiled.